Welcome to another of my takes on China. I had a comment about the situation regarding employment security in China. Is it as bad, Peter Hartel asked me, as the UK, where we see thousands of gig riders doing deliveries, some of them on bicycles? The answer is no, but it got me thinking a lot about the past. It's extremely rare to see deliveries done on a bicycle nowadays. In fact, I honestly can't remember the last time I saw it. I travel a lot. And every city I go to, no matter what class of city tier, has motor scooters or electric scooters doing deliveries. It's a huge industry, and until a few years ago, it was a harsh and unregulated way of doing business. It's not so now. There are, of course, many people still riding bicycles, including me. I prefer my bike to owning a car, something I haven't done in the last 20 years here. But if I was working on my bike, I'd upgrade it to an e-bike. They aren't that expensive. A friend of mine just bought a very, very good one, top of the range, 4,000 RMB. That's about 350 pounds in Britain. Then I thought a lot about how things have changed in my time here in China. I had someone telling me online that the CPC, of course he said CCP, was corrupt, buying land at prices of 10 years ago and causing people to lose their livelihood, then pay tax for the privilege. And that may well have been true in the past. I really don't know. Probably it was true, but I can't accept that it is now. The respondent suggested I go to China and I ask Chinese people about it. This is clearly someone who hasn't done their research on me. The truth is, China was corrupt, it was dirty, it was polluted, and it was underdeveloped. The facts are that it isn't now. And the only way to find out about the truth is to do exactly what this guy suggested I do. Go into China and ask people, which is why I like traveling so much. And particularly I like traveling by bike. I get a sense of the place when I stop in a small town. I spend the night in a tiny bingguan, that's a guest house, and not a smart hotel. And when I eat there, buy snacks there, or just walk through the town before settling down for the night, my sense is that people are generally happy. And while this is my opinion, it's an opinion I've formed that's been supported by almost every research paper and opinion poll that has been done with any sort of recognized methodology. Of course, Adrian Zenz, when he acquires statistics for his research on Xinjiang, has no methodology at all. He just asked 8 people who are not in China, then extrapolated the answer to apply to 24 million people who are in China. And hey presto, you have the basis of a misinformation narrative. So another misinformation narrative that Peter's question got me thinking about was the old stories about sweatshops, insecurity of wages, low quality education, accommodation in China. These are all long gone, the complete opposite of the UK, in fact. Firstly, there are no sweatshops here now. I have to say there are some very small family-owned businesses where guys work in what can only be described as sweatshop conditions. But they're usually 1 or 2 people only working there. They aren't employing people. There are a couple of guys doing contract work for larger contractors and making a few bucks as either self-employed or family employed. Many of them can be seen. Just walk around the side streets of most smaller cities. But they are not places where more than a handful of people work. Factories here are larger than we're used to in the West. A small factory might have 250 people, but it will also have accommodation that's free or heavily subsidized. They have canteens, also free or heavily subsidized. They have gymnasiums, basketball courts, and other entertainment. They are, in fact, small communities where many people stay for a few years or many years. While living there, they save a huge percentage of their salaries, or they send salaries home. Sometimes they do both. Now, I left the UK in 1987. At that time, I had absolutely no inkling what job insecurity looked like. Back then, if you got a job, you had a job. Unless you quit or got fired, and there needed to be a damn good reason for that, you had your job until you were ready to change. Then I went to Australia, and the first job I was able to get was called a casual. No job security, no allowances for pensions, leave, sicknesses, but they gave me a couple of dollars more per hour than contracted workers. It was like being on probation, but it was completely unregulated. You could be a casual for years, or you could get lucky. I did, and I got a contract quickly. But even after getting a real job, you could be fired any time in the first 3 months. That was back then. It's changed now to any time in the first 6 months. And believe me, it's utilized. I know a person personally, family member, who was fired from 3 jobs in a row in the last week of a 6-month probation. She wasn't fired for performance or any other issue, and it wasn't because the job closed down. In each case, she learned that she had replaced someone who was fired at 6 months, and someone replaced her and was fired at 6 months later. In other words, Australian employers can hire and fire without recourse to law or even a reason during this probation period, and there's nothing the law can do to prevent this predatory practice. Probationers are cheaper than confirmed employees, so keeping people permanently on probation is a great way to save costs, but it's a terrible way to do business. The UK is now very much about insecure gig workers, Uber drivers, food deliveries. The Trade Union Congress puts the number of insecure workers at 4.8 million people. Imagine that. There's only 66 million people, and 8% of them don't have a proper job. That's not the working population, that's the entire population. China does have these, but since 2002 they're now regulated. The drivers or riders get all the allowances of a contracted employee. In China, there's no such thing as a minimum wage. Each city or region has its own standards, but salaries everywhere are enough to find decent accommodation. Food is cheap enough to eat 3 meals a day, and most people can save too. That's not to say there are not some people breaking the law, paying under the required salary or expecting overtime to be done, but they are illegal, and if caught, they will be punished. They often are, and it's in the media here a lot. As for employment allowances, listen to this. Every employee has a pension. When they retire, currently the age is 50 for blue-collar women, 55 for white-collar women, and 60 for everyone else. That's the males. They get the pension, and it's the same as their salary was in the last year of employment, but it gets better. Pensioners don't pay tax on it. So in effect, they get a salary increase. Also, when they retire, they get free local public transport and either free or half-price entry into any venue where you have to pay. There are also many community venues that they can go to free and get subsidized food. They can play games, get medical checkups and minor treatment without queuing at the hospital or paying at a doctor's. Every employee gets medical insurance. It's a percentage of the salary and it's deducted into a bank account in the employee's name. It's treated like a debit card, so the longer we work here, the more we have. And I say we because it's every employee, including us foreigners. We can use it or we can save it. If we save it, we can retire comfortably with several 100,000 RMB in the bank, and we all still pay for hospital treatment from that. So we choose to use the card for our social security savings or pay cash if it's a small amount. Every employee who doesn't own a home has a housing allowance. They can contribute to the fund, but the money they put into it is not theirs until they buy their first home. It can only be used for a home purchase. So when the employee is ready, they claim it from their employer and use it for the deposit. Or in some cases, and I know people who've done this, they buy a home outright, cash. Every employee contributes to an unemployment insurance scheme. If they're made redundant, they get a payment of 1 month's salary for every year they've worked, and 1 month in lieu of notice if they're not given notice. That's the law, no matter what length of time they work there or how much insurance they've paid into it. That's pretty good. Every employee is entitled to sick leave and annual leave. Now, these are not as generous as in the West, but they've been added to the legislation since my arrival in China. They're still developing this, and each province has different rules around this kind of thing. Some only get a few days a year, some get more. However, everyone gets 10 days national holiday at Chinese New Year, 3 days at Qingming, which is tomb sweeping, 3 days at Mid-Autumn Festival, 3 days at National Day, and 3 days at May Day. If they have to work on any of those days, they get 2.5 times salary. So when I retired from work, I was able to claim back and cash in all my allowances. It was quite a nice little nest egg to start my retirement. Chinese people don't cash them in. And this applies even if we're younger. If a 25-year-old foreigner comes to work in China for, say, 10 years, they'll go home with a great deal of enforced savings. Plus, if they've lived a normal life, they've probably got a lot of savings of their own too. Westerners usually do cash in because most of us will finish work and head home. But if we retire here, we could, if we wanted, choose the medical benefit system. In my case, I can't now. I cashed it in. I got paid all the money I put into it back. There's a very good reason why the Chinese government has a 90% plus approval rating. And it isn't because they've fudged the numbers. It's because they're constantly improving the lives of people here. All of these facts that I've given to you are verifiable in the Chinese labor laws, which I've linked. These are posted on the China government website in English, so anyone can go and check them out. So please, feel free to argue with me, free to debate. You may have some specific examples of people getting mistreated in China. I know it does happen, I'm not arguing that, but it is against the law. And if you break the law in China, then eventually you get caught. Thanks for watching my take on China. I will see you next time. Bye for now.